Hi, welcome to Building a More Valuable Dental Practice, Operating Smarter, Not Working Harder. If you have any questions as we go along, please post those in the Q&A, and we'll go ahead and answer those by email after the webinar. Also, just a reminder, there is no CE available, whether you're watching it live or on demand. My name is Greg Auerbach. I've been evaluating and transitioning, as well as working with practitioners to enhance profitability and value in their practices for over 20 years. I've been through the evaluation and transition process when my company was acquired by Schein, and am now part of the senior leadership team as a senior director, with one of my responsibilities focused on practice valuation products. Joining us today as well is Philip Curtis. Philip is the Director of Sales and Marketing for Unitas PPO Solutions. Unitas has helped thousands of practices nationwide to negotiate higher PPO insurance reimbursement rates. In addition, Jeff Crockett is the Senior Marketing Director for eAssist Dental Solutions. Jeff is a seasoned marketing professional with a passion for driving strategic growth. Jeff has demonstrated a keen ability to navigate and excel in dynamic industries, and his career journey has equipped him with a wealth of insights and expertise that he leverages to create impactful campaigns and foster brand success. We're all excited to be here with you and hope that you take away a lot from this time with us. Let's start, though, with what practice value is. So we want to talk about what is a dental practice worth and how is value determined. We actually have methodologies for this, and there are a lot of things that are out there in the marketplace to talk about practice value. And I just want to take a second as a baseline to lay those out and figure out how we go forward from there. So when we talk about methodology, we have two things. We have quote-unquote methodology, and we have actual methodology. So when we talk about quote-unquote methodology, we have things that are out there that a lot of purchasers or articles will cite very frequently. First would be like a percentage of gross income. So this would be someone saying a practice is worth 75 or 80% or 60% of collections. There are also things that are out there, or people that will cite percentage or multiple of net income, or they'll look at the percentage of gross or multiple of net income and look at the value of the tangible assets, or some combination thereof. At the end of the day, the reference to this is really a SWAG method. And this is the MBA term for simple, wild ass guess. And it really is just taking a dart and throwing it at a dartboard and coming up with a number, because none of them really are true methodologies for evaluating a business. If we want to look at that a little bit further, we look at two practices. And so we have a couple of versions of this. We have practice A with gross collections of $800,000 and 6 operatories. We would say, let's say in this office, that the equipment is current. Perhaps it looks something like this. By contrast, we have practice B with gross collections of $800,000, 6 operatories, and we'll say the equipment is vintage. Perhaps something like this. My question for you would be, are those practices worth the same? Are they both worth, say, $600,000 or 75% of collections? And in most cases, most practitioners would say, absolutely not. Just by looking at the equipment in the top 2 pictures versus the bottom 2, there is seemingly more value for a more modern facility, equipment that is up to date, and likely functional for a very long time. Look at part 2 of this 2-practice scenario. Practice A also, again, grossing $800,000 with 6 operatories, but now we're going to say it has an overhead of 60%. And practice B, by contrast, gross collections $800,000, 6 operatories, an overhead of 62%. So the same question is out there. With the overhead of 60 versus 62, are both practices also worth $600,000 or 75% of collections? And if you're in the business of looking at these things, or if you are a purchaser out there, you're probably also going to say, well, no, of course they're not worth the same thing. When we talk about practice value, quote-unquote methodology versus actual methodology, we have tried and true business methods to get to value. These are formulaic in basis, but they take in a lot of data to get there. So it's not simplistic in nature by just saying a percent of something. So in that we have, for example, the amortization of earnings or the multi-period discounting method. These are both used in business valuation on an ongoing basis, and something that we can apply to dentistry as well. More often, though, we look at these other ways of evaluating. We use the asset summation approach or the liquidation approach. Those two are founded in looking at the equipment and the assets of a practice and looking at the goodwill of a practice and adding those together. So in particular, we don't really like to use the liquidation approach very often because that means something probably has happened. By contrast, if we look at the asset summation approach, we will look at the historical nature of goodwill in practices and then evaluate the equipment that's existing in the facility along with the supplies and inventory and other tangible assets to come up with an overall value. Most often, though, what we find is most reliable is looking one at the market, which is similar to asking your realtor, what has a house sold for in my area, and trying to use that to come up with the value of your own house. We look at practices day in and day out, and we transition and transact practices day in and day out. So we know the market for the very local area of where your practice is located, and therefore can use that to leverage it to get to actual value at the end of the day. Using that in concert, though, with a formulaic process, the single period capitalization of earnings method has tried and true, has been the most accurate in all evaluation methodologies for dentistry. So in that, we're going to compute net income, so the amount of money that's left over at the end of the day, and we're going to then capitalize that to come back to value. I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about this, but I want to really come down to what the core is. The core and where a capitalization method comes in is value is a function of two things, net income and risk. And we're going to come back to this several times throughout the webinar because it is the core of everything that we're doing. We're going to talk about two different ways to approach this, and the capitalization of earnings method is one of the ones that actually will look at net income and then work to quantify risk within that schema. How do we do that? So understanding the cap rate, we're going to look and, again, determine and quantify risk. When we're quantifying risk, we're looking at several risk factors. In particular, the list that's here. We look at the financial market. So what's going on, say, if you were to invest money outside of dentistry, what would your rate of return be? What is a baseline normal expectation for something that you don't have to do anything, and you're just going to put your money somewhere and earn a return? If you can't earn more than that, then that's where you would put your money. But the idea in dentistry is that you would have a take home and do more and earn more than that. So we use that as a baseline to build from. Beyond that, we're looking at national and local economy. Is it good? Is it bad? Is it risky? And adding that as a risk factor and a risk amount to the overall capitalization rate. We look at specialty in your practice because especially if you're a general practitioner, but even if you're a specialist and you're practicing outside of your specialty, it becomes risky to find a practitioner to take over your office and continue operating it as you do. In that case, when it's harder to find someone, then it becomes a riskier proposition and therefore the risk rate goes up. Reduced fee is a big component of this. So are you working harder to earn less money? And so this is a big component, and we're obviously going to talk about that a lot today. Size marketability has to do with the size of your practice overall. Is it approachable for most of the market? If a buyer is unable to walk in and, again, take over the practice as is, or there are faults in that, and it could be that it's too small and therefore they can't earn a living, or it's too big and therefore they can't approach the size of the practice, it becomes a riskier proposition. One, because we have less purchasers, but two, just a purchaser walking in may not be able to keep the practice up or maintain their own lifestyle. The last is systems. We're going to come back to this and talk in more detail about it, but it's really about how the practice operates overall. And this will, again, relate to a lot of what we're talking about today. We look at these risk factors and we consider it on a non-owner, third party owning the practice. So you as an owner of your practice, that is not how this applies. We actually take you out of the equation and plug in an associate or associates to do all the production in the office because this is an investment at this point. Business methodology is based on the fact not as an owner-operator, but by a third party owning it and taking home an investment from that operation. And therefore, we have to have a practitioner to do all the dentistry. So this is, again, non-owner third party net income. It's not what's on your tax return. It's not what's on most of your profit and losses. It's something that we have to work through, clean up, and calculate figure out your operating expenses, figure out the operating expenses to operate and run the office itself and earn the, to produce the dentistry, and then what's left over at the end of the day. So if we look at this further, we have practice A, again, with overhead at 60%, and practice B at 62%. We've all agreed that it's not worth $600,000 or 75% of collection. So what do we do when we talk about the actual methodology? We look at practice A, and we're going to use a cap rate of 20%. I'm just going to need you to trust me. That's a good cap rate. Cap rates can go anywhere from 15% up to over 50%. So 20% is a very solid practice overall. We use the gross collections of $800,000. We calculated overhead of 60%, which is a quality overhead for an $800,000 office, and that nets out at $480,000. We have a cost to produce, again, because it's a third-party operator. We need to have an associate in the practice doing that. We're going to pay them 32% of what they produce, and we're going to assume that 75% of the 75% of the $800,000 is done by the dentist. Therefore, their pay for what they do is $192,000. The practice net then, at the end of the day, for the investor is $128,000. We take that $128,000, divide it by 20%, and we get to a value of $640,000. That is the clean and simple way to look at how a cap rate is calculated. It's much more intricate, but we wanted to give you a pretty simple example. If, though, we then take practice A at value of $640,000 and look at practice B. Practice B, we're going to actually assume the same cap rate at 20%. Gross collections, $800,000. The overhead, though, at 62% is a little bit more costly. We're going to say the cost to produce, the associate compensation is the same, and then practice net is $112,000. So the only thing that we changed in these two examples is the overhead going up from 60 to 62%. And you can see at the end of the day, we take value of net $112,000, divide that again by the 20%, we get a value of $560,000. And we assume 75% collections doctor, 25% hygiene. The hygiene collections, the cost to produce hygiene is actually calculated in the overall overhead. So the cost to produce, again, is all the same. The only thing that we change between these two is the overhead, 60 to 62%. So if we look at them next to each other, practice A, net income, $128,000, value $640. Practice B, net income, $112,000 and value $560. So $16,000 in net income equated to $80,000 in value. This is why we come to that core. A little bit of net income can equate to a significant amount of value. So where does this go from there? When we're talking about in net income, a lot of that will come into your fees. If fees is your primary driver, this is where you're making money. The overhead is the overhead of the office. And so we want to talk a lot, and we're going to focus in a lot of fees because that drives your top line collection. Let's talk first about the cost of discounted dentistry. Let's do another tale of two practices. This is actually a single practice. We're going to look at it in multiple ways, though. So we're going to have one crown. It's a D70 2750. We're going to assume a UCR, which is the national UCR, of right around $1,550. So $1,547. We're going to make the assumption that your preparation takes about an hour. Cementation takes 3/4 of an hour. Your lab fee is $155. Your supplies for that one crown is $95. And then you have a fixed operating expense of your office for everything else, which would include utilities, rent, staff, everything that you need in your office runs at roughly $525 per hour. And we're going to multiply that over the hour and 3/4 that it takes you to create and put and deliver that crown. At that point, $525 times an hour and 3/4 is $919. If we take the $1,547, subtract out the lab fee, subtract out the supply cost, subtract out your fixed expenses, you're left with pre-tax earnings of $378. We divide that by the hour and 3/4, and it leaves you roughly $216 per hour of earnings. Not too bad. The next two steps, though, are UCR at 90% and UCR at 80%. I'm going to walk through just the 80% because in most cases, your discounts probably are more than 10%, especially if you're participating in some sort of PPO or other insurance plan. So if we look at a fee at 80% discount, that's roughly $1,200. Your time is the same. It still takes you an hour and 3/4 to do it. You don't have a special lab. You don't have a special supply house, most likely, for that crown. Therefore, the costs are the same. You also don't get to use a different facility or staff or utility, so your fixed expenses are the same. At the end of the day, when you take that $1,238 minus your lab, minus your supplies, minus your fixed expenses, your pre-tax earnings are now $69, which equates to $39.43 per hour. We look at the bottom line here. Just a quick note about that $39. If you have a hygienist and you're paying them $300 a day, they're actually making $37.50 per hour. In that case, you're making just as much as your hygienist. You're owning a practice. You're operating with all of the risk and all of the liability, and not to mention the additional training that you have, and you're making just about the same. So the fees in your practice are incredibly important. And with that, we want to have a little bit more conversation, and we will have a little bit more conversation. So if we discuss the cost of discounted dentistry, and we look at 1 crown per day, so $15.47 UCR versus that 20% off of $12.38. If we take that over 4 days a week, again, over the course of a year, whether it be a 45-week or a 50-week year, at UCR, we would expect you to make somewhere between $275,000 and $310,000 in gross collection just doing that single crown per day. By discounting it 20%, we've now reduced it to about $5,000 a week, or somewhere between $220,000 to $250,000 per year. This is a significant decrease for 20% off. With a summary of 45 weeks, that's about $55,000 difference between the two. So that's a total loss of roughly $56,000 per year. If we go back to the capitalization rate at 20%, that's roughly $278,000 worth of value lost in a discounted crown. It's a little bit worse if you look at it over 50 weeks. We have $62,000 in net loss. Capitalize that at 20%, and we're at $300,000+ in lost value in just a discounted crown. So you may say, I like to be busy, or I like to have production. I like to keep things moving in my office. But understanding how much that can affect you both on the top line and on the value line, which in between, there's a net income line that is almost neutralized at zero, is a big, big deal. And that's why we have our partners here, and why I'm excited to pass this over to Philip so we can talk a little bit more about how we can work through and work beyond the significant loss you can have in discounting a crown.
Thanks, Greg. Appreciate it. That was super helpful information and a perfect tee off for what we're going to talk about next. So I'm going to take over this screen sharing real fast and share my screen, and we'll keep moving. Can you guys see that okay? That pulling up for you? Awesome. Okay, so perfect pivot and segue into what we're going to talk about next. So just like Greg was saying, your ability to increase net income is crucial, especially when you're talking about preparing to or eventually selling your practice. And that's where we specialize. And when it comes down to it, just like Greg said, the vast majority of the net income that you earn as a dental practice owner or as a practitioner comes from the insurance reimbursements that you're paid. And the reason why is because anywhere from 70 to 80% of the United States population is in some way, shape, or form having dental insurance, either through their employer or they're purchasing it themselves. And so ultimately, the path to increasing your revenue, increasing your net income, and increasing the ultimate sale price of your practice is going to come in and by negotiating your insurance reimbursement rates. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. The PPO profitability strategies that lie before you are well laid out. We'll talk about the framework. We'll talk about how Unitas can implement these for you, or how you can work through this in your practice on your own. So what we're going to dive into are the 3 main strategies to increasing your PPO reimbursements. And we're going to talk about the framework that Unitas implements for the practices that we represent. And we'll go through that for you today. And just again, just like Greg said, what you'll be able to do is anytime during the presentation, if you have any questions, feel free to submit those through the Q&A section, and we'll respond to those via email. So let's dive in. We're going to talk about the 3 profitability strategies. Number 1, how to identify and map out the PPOs that you actually participate with so we know which ones we need to fix. And then number 2, how to utilize our proven 3-step negotiation framework to increase your reimbursement rates. And then number 3, the simple calculation you can use if you're going to forecast your PPO negotiation return. And that's not even calculating into to affect what Greg's talked about, which is the ultimate net income increase and what that looks like on the tail end after you've sold your practice. So we'll go into all of that information now. Now, like I said, and like what Greg reiterated, recent polls have shown that over 82% of dentists have seen no reimbursement increase in the last 12 months, which is shocking. 1, because expenses continue to rise for every business in the country, not just dentists. And number 2, what's more shocking than that is because nobody's attempted to negotiate, the results aren't happening. And so that's what we're here to talk to you about today, is that it's possible to negotiate and increase your reimbursement rates, and we do it day in and day out for thousands of practices. So, like I said, we've worked on this for thousands of practices across all 50 states. We've actually been doing this since 2011. We're one of the largest, if not the largest, negotiators in the country and credentialers. We have over 1,800 active clients right now and over 100 PPO insurance consultants. And this is all we do, is negotiate and increase those reimbursement rates so that way your net income as a dental practice owner can increase. So the first step, how to identify and map out your participation per PPO, comes down to 3 key categories. We need to discover and map that out per insurance. We need to receive and document the fee schedules so that way we know what you're being paid. And then we need to compare and repair any UCR, just like Greg was mentioning, any UCR and reimbursement rate discrepancies. Because ultimately, if you're going to take a discount from insurance, you want to make sure that you're getting your maximum reimbursement. So let's dive in. Number 1, how can you identify and map out your specific PPO participation per doctor and per location and identify those issues? Now, it's important to understand that PPO relationships and going in network and taking that discount, like Greg has talked about, there's different relationships that you can come into, and they're going to vary depending on how the PPO elects to set you up, and that's going to affect your reimbursement rate. So direct contracts with insurance companies, that's a result of credentialing with an insurance company, agreeing to being paid according to their fee schedule. You treat their patients, they pay your claim according to the fee schedule. That's the most normal relationship. But what more often happens to practices that they're not aware of is that when you join an insurance company and you've directly credentialed with them and you've agreed to receive those reimbursement rates, you've also signed a contract that allows that insurance company to lease you out to any other insurance company that wants to create an agreement with them. So what that typically means is you could credential with somebody like Aetna, wanting to treat Aetna patients and wanting to be paid according to Aetna's fee schedule because you were happy with those reimbursement rates. But maybe for some reason you didn't want to credential with one of their lease partners. So maybe you didn't want to credential with Guardian or Sun Life or one of those carriers. But what they can do is Guardian can come to Aetna, sign paperwork between those carriers, and with the sign of a pen, now you're in network with Guardian Insurance and Guardian insured patients through your Aetna contract. So what does that mean? Guardian patients show up at your practice, you treat them, you send the claim to Guardian, claim comes back from Guardian, and now it's an in-network claim, and they're borrowing Aetna's rate of reimbursement. So if Aetna agreed to pay you $85 on this procedure, no, Guardian's paying you $85. Now, again, as I described that, some practices are frustrated because they don't realize that this is happening, and that's not my point at all. There's no better way to participate. What it comes down to is what is the maximum available reimbursement to you. And PPO to PPO leasing is just one way for you to be in network with insurance. It's not necessarily worse or better than direct contracts. It's just a different relationship. And just like when you do an x-ray on a patient to figure out what the problem is, and that's going to determine what treatment you're going to employ, the same thing applies here. If you want your reimbursement rates to go up, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to contact the insurance companies to figure out how you're participating with these insurance plans to then figure out what type of strategies we should employ if we're going to try to increase your fee schedule. Same thing applies with this third type. Umbrella networking is something that practices are familiar with, but you're probably more familiar with these names like Dynamax or Carrington or Connection. These umbrella networks don't typically have card-carrying patients, but when you credential with somebody like Dynamax, you agree to a set of fee schedule reimbursement rates, right? Those discounts off of your UCR. And then when you credential with that company, they turn around and they shotgun your information out to multiple PPOs. So then what typically happens is if you credential with somebody like Dynamax and you agree to be paid $100 for a particular procedure, Dynamax turns it around, shoots your information out to multiple PPOs. So then what can happen is that now you're in network with potentially Cigna and Guardian and MetLife all through that Dynamax contract. So you treat any one of those patients,
doing the same procedure, the claims will still come back from those respective insurance companies, but they're all paying you the exact same amount. And the reason why is because they're accessing you through that DentalMax contract. And each contract has its own fee schedule with its own reimbursements. So again, not necessarily a good or a bad way to participate with insurance. It's just a way that a doctor can be in network with insurance and get paid by them. So ultimately, if that fee schedule you're getting paid on is the best available fee schedule out there, great. Ultimately, though, we want it to go up, right? We want those to go up as high as we can. Like Greg has demonstrated, the higher you can get your reimbursement rates from your insurance companies, the higher your net income. And the higher your net income, the higher the ultimate practice value you have when you sell. So understanding how you participate in doing the work to make these phone calls and emails to these insurance companies will tell us what needs to be done in order to negotiate and optimize. Just like when you do an X-ray on a patient, you'll know which treatment to employ. We need to dig this deeply into each of your locations and each of your doctors in order to know what relationships you have per doctor, per location, to figure out how we can employ negotiations. So what we'll do is we'll call provider relations, we'll check your portal, we'll email them to get a copy of your current fee schedule, or again, just something that you can try yourself. You can reach out to these carriers. Well, ultimately, when you get this information back from them to figure out exactly how you're participating, update your practice management software so you know what you're supposed to be paid. Then the next thing you need to do is make sure that there is no situation where your reimbursement rate from a PPO is below what your UCR is. Just like what Greg was saying, your UCR is what you want to be paid, right? Your reimbursement rate is what you actually get paid from the PPO. And like, in some scenarios, maybe you can collect the difference between that from the patient. Some scenarios you can't, depending on the plans you've enrolled. So a lot of times, more often than not, what you actually get paid is that reimbursement rate, that discounted rate, like what Greg talked about. So the first thing that you can do to make sure that you set yourself up for success is make sure that none of your UCRs are below what your contracted reimbursement rate is. And the problem with that is if they are, then what that means is you've already shot yourself in the foot. You're never going to get paid your UCR because every PPO wants to take a discount off of your UCR. So if you say, my UCR is $85, and that PPO was already willing to pay you $95 because that was on the fee schedule, you'll never get $95. You're going to get a percentage of $85 because you've set the ceiling. That's how UCRs work. When I submit a claim to an insurance company and I submit my UCR, that UCR is the starting point. The fee schedule is set based off of what the average UCRs are in an area. But if a dentist ever submits a UCR that's below the contracted rate, they'll almost never get paid that because the insurance company needs to show a percentage discount both to themselves and to the patient. So the first thing you can do to set yourself up for success is enter your fee schedules in, compare them against your UCRs, and make sure that none of your UCRs are lower than your contracted reimbursement rates. That's what we do for our clients at the very beginning to make sure that they're set up for success. We also help them evaluate those UCRs to make sure that they're competitive for their area. And the reason why is because high UCRs correlate to high reimbursement rates. Now, the next thing we go into is the negotiation process. After we've identified who you work with and after we've set your UCRs correctly, we'll reach out to each carrier. We'll make sure that we're not wasting time on the wrong procedures. We'll approach the process tactfully and we'll compare those offers once they're received. So what we'll do is we'll look at a production summary. We'll look at which procedure codes are the most popular for you, and those are the ones that we'll focus in on. We'll sort those based off of highest grossing collection or production amounts. So that way, when we're negotiating with a carrier, we're looking at the procedures you actually do. Most PPOs will consider negotiating every 2 to 3 years, so that's important to know. Additionally, we'll reach out to the provider relations rep or our point of contact at that insurance company to request a fee schedule increase. This is something that you do on your own. You're going to need to start with whoever you're in contact with regular, whoever you already know. Reach out to provider relations to request an increase. But one thing you want to do is you want to make sure that you're paying attention to your PPO participation, so you're not reaching out to the wrong person. So for example, if you were doing this on your own and you wanted to reach out and you wanted to negotiate, ideally you would collect your participation at the beginning and you'd pay attention to those differences. If you find out that you're in network with Guardian through Aetna, then you need to reach out to actually Aetna first to negotiate because that's the contract that's being paid. That's the fee schedule that needs to be negotiated. If you reach out to Guardian first, then you're going to ultimately get a proposal from Guardian. And if you're not paying attention to your participation, you could unintentionally shift yourself to a lower paying fee schedule if you're not doing this in the right order. Okay. Now, if an insurance company responds back, typically what we do is we look at those 35 procedure codes. We'll evaluate them against your current fee schedule and your new fee schedule to figure out how much of a percentage increase that is. We'll help figure out if there's anything that's outweighed based on your frequency. So maybe they increase your crown by $100, but maybe they decrease your pro fee by $5. So again, most practices do a lot more pro fees than they do crowns. So we're going to need to do the math to figure out, ultimately, is this an overall procedure or a production increase for you, or is it a production decrease for you? Because our goal at the end of the day is to increase, just like Greg said, your net income. We want to make sure that you're making more per PPO anywhere possible. Ultimately, then, after you accepted a fee increase, we got to audit those EOBs to make sure that you're actually getting paid according to the new fee schedule. And then ultimately, after we're doing all that, we need to make sure that we're running calculations the whole time to make sure that this is worth the investment for you. If you're going to do this on your own, you're going to want to know, how do I know this is worth my time? If you pay something like Unitas to do this, you want to know, how do I know that this is worth my investment? So a couple things to keep in mind there. If you're wanting to forecast your ROI, first things first, you need to ensure that your PPOs are competitive for your area. Second thing is you need to understand what optimization is and what type of strategies you can employ. And then the third thing is then you'll be able to understand how to calculate your return on investment. Okay. So first thing, to ensure that your PPO offers are competitive for your area, what you have to realize is a couple of things. When you accept a fee schedule increase from an insurance company, if you've negotiated on your own and you've gotten them to respond and you like what the offer that they've given to you, what you have to realize is when you accept that offer, you'll be locked into that fee schedule for a minimum of 2 years. So what that means is if you've negotiated on your own and then you come to Unitas, odds are we probably won't be able to negotiate for you because you've been locked in. So what that means is whatever you accept matters. And why it matters is because I've talked to thousands of doctors who've been on the same rates for 10 years or 15 years or 20 years. And I'm sure Greg has had the same experience. There's lots of doctors out there that are on the same rates that they accepted back in 1980. And obviously, expenses have increased since they accepted those rates. So what matters here is that Unitas has the data to compare the offers that are received from the insurance companies to determine if they're competitive or not. What you have is, what am I paid now? What did they just offer me? And then what am I paid from my other insurance companies? What we have is the thousands and thousands of fee schedules from thousands and thousands of clients per state, across the country to know what a good rate of reimbursement rate looks like. So not only do we have good points of contact that we worked with at each insurance company that know who we are, they know how many clients we've represented, we also have the data to support that and to know how far we should push. So just like Greg said, if you're selling your house, you can go on Zillow to see what a fair rate of reimbursement is, right? Or a fair purchase price is for a house or a sell price. Same thing when it comes down to when you're selling your practice. Unfortunately, in the PPO world, there is no Zillow for PPO reimbursement rates. And the reason why is because you've all signed contracts that preclude you from sharing your reimbursement rates with each other. So you're unable to do that. And so by working with a company like Unitas, because we have so much representation, we know what a competitive rate of reimbursement looks like. So we can negotiate on your behalf. We've done so for thousands of clients nationwide. We bring both the leverage to the table and the data, but we also bring a carrot. We don't just bring a stick. Because we're one of the largest credentialers in the country, we bring doctors. We bring thousands of doctors to PPOs on an annual basis. And so that allows us to negotiate at a high level. Optimization in a nutshell is a strategy that we can help employ beyond just negotiating to get you on to higher fee schedules. So when you have two PPOs leasing from each other, that means that every insurance company out there has multiple paths to participation. And we're the experts in helping you achieve that. So ultimately, if we're going to optimize, we're going to talk you through, hey, if you're in network with Guardian through Aetna, what are the other options that are out there? Can Guardian get picked up through Carrington or Dynamax? Or what about Guardian Direct? Or what about Guardian through Sun Life? So with every PPO out there, there's opportunities for you to get higher fee schedules, whether that's us reaching out to them and just negotiating the fee schedule you're on now, or us using our optimization strategies to get that insurance company picked up through another company who pays higher than the one that's paying you now. Ultimately, projected revenue increase is possible when you're working with Unitas because we track our results. We've done this for 10 years, so we know what our historical results are. So the way that we project that for practices is we look at kind of three numbers. What is your total annual production, or we could even use collections? What percentage of that is coming from PPOs that we negotiate or that we can negotiate? And then what is the average percentage increase we achieve? For us, that's an average increase of 10%. So if only half of your production is increased by 10%, that's an instant $50,000 gain to net income. So again, if we were using collections, just the same numbers Greg had, if you had a practice with $800,000 in collections, 50% of that collections comes from PPOs that we increase by an average of 10%. That's $800,000, $400,000 that we can touch at a 10% increase. That's $40,000 of straight net income to the bottom line right there, just from negotiating. And Greg's already shown you what that looks like when you end up selling your practice. $16,000 when the cap rate of 20% ends up becoming $80,000. That's what we're talking about here. A $50,000 increase would be a substantial increase if you're talking about net income and increasing your ultimate purchase price. So that's what we're bringing to the table when we talk about Unitas helping you negotiate. We're the experts in increasing these fees through these strategies because we've done it for 10 years. We represent thousands of clients. We know the strategies to employ. We have the points of contact. We have the leverage, and we have the experts on our team to be able to accomplish that for you. So if you wanted to get the framework that we just talked about, if you want to be able to implement this in your own practice or to learn more about Unitas, this PPO Negotiation Quick Start Guide is something you guys can download for free for being an attendee on this webinar. All you got to do is go to ppoguide.com, or you can scan that QR code. But again, just want to hand the mic back to Greg. I think that this is one of the most important strategies that you can employ to increase net income because you're still doing the same amount of work, just like Greg said, but ultimately, if you're working with PPOs, you're going to take a huge discount. So every dollar you can get back from them is going to be returned to you tenfold when you end up selling your practice. So that's what we help you do. Greg, happy to turn the mic back over to you.
There's not a time that I hear you present and hear you guys' conversations and I don't get scared. I mean, it's just there's so much money that's left over at that point, so much opportunity that's out there at that point, and not being able to capture it, it's just huge. And these are huge opportunities. I'm going to come back to even that amount, like that, what that cash is left over, at the end of the day, like where does that come from? We're going to talk about that in a second too. So thanks, Phil.
Yeah, no problem.
Let's talk about risk though. I mean, we talked about net income, we talked about growing your growth collections overall and then that yielding net income. But the other component that I talked about value is in risk. So let's talk about risk, and particularly the risk as it ties to collections.
Yeah.
So again, we talked about net income and risk as value, and we talked about where that came from. It's coming from the capitalization where we're quantifying risk, and we're talking about those risk factors again, financial, national, local, specialty, reduced fee, which we just talked about, size marketability, and then I told you we were going to come back to systems. And reminder again, this is all non-owner, third-party net income after operating expenses. So if we talk about reduced fees, again, let's come back to what makes up riskiness in a practice. So there are a number of items. One, we can look at location. I mean, what are the patient demographics for a specific location? What are the employment rates? How does the location actually fit into how your practice fits even? What kind of patient base do you want? The availability of facilities can be a huge issue. This is coming into whether you can lease or maybe you don't have a lease, and the inability to have a lease or the desire for someone to take over your building and build a bigger, better building and you being kicked out could be a component of risk. There's also the case where someone, maybe the county government wants to take and move or expand a road, and therefore that impinges on your ability to continue operating. Facility availability can be hugely risky. Specialty, as we talked about again, especially if you're working outside of what kind of practice you typically are. Staff is always a level of risk because they can leave, obviously. And we all know that staff is a persistent, consistent challenge in practices. Equipment and technology, again, if it's old in particular or constantly breaking down, that can be hugely risky. Fees, as we discussed, the more you have to work and the less you get paid, the harder it is to do it. But then there are the systems in the practice. We're going to come back to that. So let's talk about systems themselves. There are a number of systems that we look at, and when we actually evaluate a practice, we're going to give you a sheet, or we're going to go through questions with you about what your practice is doing on a systems level. So we talk about several, like scheduling, for example. Is it computerized? Do you have goal setting and tracking? Your continuing care, that's a whole nother system in your practice. How are you getting your active patient base back into your practice? What is your active patient base, and what is your cancellation percentage? Because if you have a lot of cases where you're having holes in your schedule, you're still paying your staff to be there in almost every case. So that is a huge risk, both in your expenses in the practice, but then the overall operation. Charting, can we understand what's there? Could someone pick it up, see it, understand what's going on in that patient chart? Staff, again, formal job descriptions are important. Do they just run around and do whatever they want to? Do they take vacation? and just not show up the next day? Is that okay? But more so, are they supportive of your practice? Are they supportive of your goals? But then we also look into the financial systems of your practice. Do you have formalized arrangements for collections? And then we also look at collections percentage. And the reason we look at this is telling us how your front desk is operating, how your patients are operating within your practice. And again, if you're producing dentistry, but you're not collecting income on it, then you just have an expense. You have no collections, you have no income, you have therefore no net income. So it's just a net loss. So when we talk about collection, this is why we have our friends. This is why eAssist is here. And Jeff, I'm so excited to turn it over to you to talk about, well, what can we do about that? Because obviously, again, it's vitally important to how we operate our practices.
Greg, thank you. And Phil, thank you for all your useful information. Just great session so far. I really feel like I've learned so much. Want to thank Henry Schein for allowing us to come with us. Always, before I start my presentation, I always like to present or talk about this case study because it's a real world experience that just kind of hits home to me. And this is just always seeing numbers or something that kind of, I'm able to put a face to the numbers and just understand it a little bit. But in July of last year, Dr. Lawrence White, he was owed $160,000 by insurance companies, which I get pretty normal. That time his office was regularly collecting about 88% of the money that was owed to him. So he was married. His wife worked in banking. Her name was Priscilla, and he offered her to come, or I guess asked her to come work for his office to kind of try to help with this, how much was owed by the insurance companies and how they were only collecting 88%. So her background in banking, she's like, oh, this would be great. So she came onto his company and started working with his office and everything. And she was noticing that it was taking her roughly 45 minutes to understand each one of their patients' account receivable or their revenue cycle. And so she looks on her list and she's like, I have 3,000 patients. Each one is taking me about 45 minutes. She's like, this is not going to get done. So as she got moved over to the CFO with her practice, she decided to bring on eAssist in August of last year to take over their billing and the collections. With this help, with eAssist, by February of this year, she was only owed $30,000 by insurers, an improvement of $138,000, and her ongoing collection rate last February was 97%. So this was real-world experience with Priscilla and Dr. White that just showed the value of the money that was on the table that was missing, the collection rate, and it was exciting for us to have this real world and to talk to Priscilla about it. So a little bit about eAssist is we invented optimized revenue cycle. We've been around for over 10 years, and our goal is really to deliver peace of mind, to make it so you could focus on your patients and providing the exceptional care that you do, and then we could focus on billing. We've collected more than $16.17 billion from insurance companies. So what is a clean claim? Correct insurance information, correct patient information, correct provider information, correct CDT codes attached, all necessary supporting documentation attached for the timely reimbursement. Now, is this easy to do? Sometimes you're trying to gather all this information and a patient walks into your office, or you're on the phone with an insurance company and you're trying to collect this information and then another patient. So how do you do all that together? So what we recommend that you do is develop a process or something that ensures that you're sending out these claims on a timely manner. I know none of us like when we all of a sudden we get a bill from a procedure that took place 6 months ago or 8 months ago or something. It doesn't give me a lot of confidence in the provider that they're billing me the correct amount. So by doing this daily, this will help it so those claims are sent in properly and your customer will receive the invoice correctly, your patient. So CDT and ICD codes, we all know how this could be a major headache. There's a code maintenance committee that actually changes these yearly. If you weren't aware, there were 16 CDT codes changed in 2024. That was just last year. There's only actually been over 160 within the last 3 years. So how do we keep up on all of these? Well, we could definitely research and do ADA materials. We could work with a company called Practice Booster on their coding manual, online coding advisor, insurance solutions, all great resources. But who does it? Is it the hygienist? Is it the assistant? Is it the dentist? Is it the office manager? When if whoever has all these codes decides to quit and move on to a different practice or to go back to school or something, how do we keep up on all this? So investing in current, complete, and accurate coding reference materials each year will improve claim reimbursement, treatment planning, and more. So we advise that you train your whole team. Don't have just one person in charge of this. Everybody on your team needs to understand. So in case there is a problem with somebody that is sick or somebody doing this, but it's also when you do all this, do you do it right at the end of the day? Do you do it before the day? When do you find time on it? And we all know if it's not documented, it didn't happen. Inadequate documentation reduces reimbursement. So who's keeping track of this documentation? If we don't have it correct, it leads to elevated frustration, lower profitability, inflated overhead, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We all know all the problems that deals with this. So a clinical note template for your hygienist, for your assistant, help keep claims squeaky clean. We do recommend that you have a template and everybody knows the correct procedure in filling this out. We found that 80% of the work that takes to collect what is produced is mostly done by the front end. So it is your front office manager. Does it always happen? Do you do it at the end of the day when if she has to leave early and so forth? If things aren't done accurately, then you're going to send a claim. You're losing money spending the time and resources to chase down the information. So we really recommend you have a pre-appointment readiness plan to get started. And this would include your date of birth for your patient, the full legal name, collecting insurance payer information before they move on to treatment, getting a breakdown of benefits to verify coverage and ability, do hygiene work to find out if it was a medical plan, and chasing down the patient. There's a great chance that with this, that you have missed dental billing steps that are causing you to lose revenue. This is just our average data that we have is the average dental practice collects $1,500,000 per year. And if they're losing or they're only collecting about 91%, their average uncollected revenue is $135,000, which in 30 years, that's over $4 million. So we want to make sure you get paid for what you're doing. So here at eAssist, we're here to help. You may be experiencing sometimes all these numbers, your paralysis, you're trying to figure out how do we do this? Where do we start? If you're needing to streamline your dental billing processes, we help you get the results you're dreaming of with professional support. Now, we're not going to outsource. We're not going to take away the office manager's position. What we're going to do is we actually have you focus on patient care, understand the patients. Now we handle all the CDT codes changing and so forth. At eAssist, we submit clean claims, we post EOBs, we do everything in our power to get your over 90 days insurance account balance down to zero. There's a lot of promises that we like to say, and the main one that I like to focus on is we collect 100% of what's rightfully owed to you. That is what we strive to do. This is what we're here to help with. We daily will send out a progress report. So you see what is your production year collection rate, how many outstanding claims you have, how many claims you've appealed and won, or we've appealed for you and you've won, any outstanding patient account receivables, much more. So the goal here with eAssist is to deliver peace of mind, to make it so you are collecting what is rightfully yours, so you're not worrying about the billing, so you could focus on patient care. Greg, I'll turn the time back over to you.
You want to talk about the QR code?
Sure. I didn't put that in, so yeah, let's do it. I thought that was yours. So for more information about eAssist and to schedule a free consultation to understand how we could help deliver peace of mind, I just recommend calling the number on the screen or scan the QR code and you can set up an appointment.
To be fair, Jeff, I was flummoxed too because, you hear these numbers and they just grow so quickly, and I mean, I do these numbers every day and I talk about this every day, but then again, seeing it broken out on this average size of a practice and how much is potentially being left on the table. I mean, it's crazy. It's not that I'm not going to go talk about that just now too, but just seeing it over and over again, it's just the complexity of all of this is incredible. And to think, I mean, you as a practitioner, you're doing dentistry, but to think about all of these other items, and Jeff, what you were talking about, it's a lot, and it's so important.
Well, and Greg, that's why I love that case study. It's a real life person. We've met Priscilla, we've met Dr. White, just real life experience on them, and they thought they could do it all by themselves. We all think we can. And when she realized it took her 45 minutes per patient and she had 3,000 patients, she was just looking at that and she's like, there is no way I'm going to be able to scratch the surface. No way.
Yep.
And still deliver the excellent patient care that they promised that they want to provide. And there was just no way that she could do it.
That's just one.
Yeah.
So let's talk, I mean, we've been talking about fees the whole time. Let's do a little bit more because we've talked about, discounting fees. We've talked about potentially not collecting on your fees. But there's another piece of this about increasing your fees as well. So the reality is that all of these expenses over your year will go up. Your supply costs are going to increase, wherever you're buying it from, costs are going up. Lab fees increase, rent and facility costs. You probably have an escalation clause in your lease. It goes up year over year. If not, taxes on the real estate that you own go up year over year. None of us have employee costs that go down. Salaries, insurance, training, benefits, everything to keep your team in place, those go up year over year. And that's not even to mention what goes on at home. Your home costs, again, your retirement needs, all of those go up year over year over year. And when we talk about fees, again, that's your top line collection. We talked about if you're discounting it, you talked about not collecting it, but the expense lines in the middle also change, and therefore it can drastically change your net income. So let's look at not collecting or not increasing your fee. So let's look at, again, an $800,000 practice with a 3% increase of your fees every single year for 5 years. So year 0, we're at 800. Year 1, we're going to add the 3%. You're going to do exactly the same dentistry and earn $824,000. Year 2, though, we're going to go up to $848,000. So we added another $24,000. So an increase of $48,000 from year 0. We do that again in year 3, year 4, and year 5. And on year 5, doing the same exact dentistry you did in year 0, you're now collecting $927,000 or $127,000 more from your base 5 years ago. Over those 5 years, that increase every year adds up to be almost $375,000 doing exactly the same dentistry. All you did was increase your fee. We'll look at another place. We look at just the annual increase. So if we say each year, this is how much your practice increases with that 3% growth, your added discretionary dollars at that point is just $127,000. When I say just, I mean, it's not the $375,000 that we talked about before. But let's assume that you take that $127,000 and you never touch it. You just throw it into an investment account. You make a modest return on it. You could make almost $500,000 just on those 5 years worth of increasing your fee. And if you're not doing that, that money will never be recovered. You can't catch up to that. So again, it's compounding year over year over year over year. One other item that we want to look at, just in looking at opportunities to enhance your top line, and again, this looks more obviously at fees as well, because it's a big part of the Henry Schein practice analysis, or HISPA as we call it in health. But it also gives you opportunities to look at how you're operating your practice between hygiene and soft tissue management, how you're looking at imaging, unscheduled treatment, and broken appointments. All of these things lead back to systems. They lead back to gross collections. They lead back to overall operations. They can lead to net income again. So we're affecting both net income and the riskiness. Our new HISPA actually comes with 60 days complete access to Jarvis, which is a huge analytics program and hugely beneficial to you as a practice. This is available from your Henry Schein dental rep, your FSC, the one that's in your house, in your office selling you cotton rolls. They are a true consultant and they have access to this. There is huge value. You will get immediate value from Henry Schein practice analysis. So we strongly encourage it. I can't speak too highly about this product. Going back to really what Jeff and Philip were talking about at different points, we look at the end of the day, I mean, we do transitions as our primary business. Obviously, the core of that is in valuation. But we talk about then, what does retirement look like and how much do you need? So this is a quick table just to give you an idea of what your after living expenses would be and what you need to have in the bank at that point. So if you want to live on $120,000 a year, that's $3.2 million in the bank, assuming 3% inflation at age 65. If you want to live a little bit nicer lifestyle at $240,000 a year, you need roughly $6.5 million. The question is where is this going to come from? So as everybody, as all three of us have talked about, the key is obviously in your collections, and you have the ability to raise your collections, raise your net income, be a more effective practitioner and really a more effective business owner and business operator just by looking very closely at how your fees and fee structures work into your practice. The retirement and the sale of your practice is not going to get you to this number nearly ever. So you need to be looking at your practice day in, day out, and employing these different mechanics and different tools to be able to grow that opportunity for you to put money away so that when the time comes that you say, I'm done, and we transition your practice, you are ready to retire. That is the biggest component, but probably one of the biggest fallacies is, again, we don't get you the money to retire. It might put you over the top, but we're not getting you the $6.5 million to live off $240,000. But by collecting better, by working better with your PPOs and getting more top-line collection, you can have the money to put away with, again, also fee increases to be in a place where you can retire and have sufficient funds to retire comfortably. So that's really the planned exit strategy. One thing that's a little bit different for topic-wise is we haven't talked a lot about exit strategy at all. We've talked about value. We've talked about how you kind of build the value, how to build the net income, but all of it ends up getting to an exit strategy. And ultimately, again, this is what we do for most of our business here at Dental Practice Transition. So a majority of practice sales do sell for somewhere between 60 and 90% of gross revenue. I understand I'm talking about percentages of growth again, and I told you at the beginning that that's not a valid way to evaluate a business, and it's still not. The reality is if you look at all of the practices, which again we do because we have comparable sales, most of them will sell somewhere between 60 and 90% of gross revenue. Again, not valuation. There is an allocation of that purchase price, so you don't get to keep all of it. The IRS is going to take their share. There's intangible assets, which would be everything that'd be goodwill, your telephone number, the tenure of your practice, your website, the viability, the location, everything that's intangible about your practice, which is typically about 70 to 90% of the purchase price, will get taxed to you at capital gain. So that's amortized over 15 years. This is the IRS doing it. The rest, tangible assets, that's everything you can touch in your practice. So that's all your chairs, your desks, the computers, the equipment. All of that is taxed as normal income. That is depreciated and amortized and expensed by the purchaser. But for you as an owner, for the person transacting out, it's going to get taxed at normal income. Every transaction will have these allocations. There's no way around it. The IRS will take their share. So again, you're not going to get the full purchase price. In the case, though, that's a planned exit strategy, and even in any other strategy, we want to bring up this other component to it. Are you aware that only 30% of practices will transition within 90 days of a practitioner who owned that practice passing away if they aren't planning for it? Only an additional 10% will sell after 90 days. Purchasers in the market look at it as a dead asset at that point, regardless of what's going on. If the practitioner is not there, whether it be death or full disability and an inability to operate the practice, the entirety of the value just washes away. 60% of practices do not sell at all, and they just end up shutting down and someone takes over the space eventually. So we say this because this is incredibly important and incredibly important for planning. And I say this for someone who actually has a father who practiced and a former partner who practiced, and both of them had to quit before they were ready to because of disability. So we bring this up because we always like to talk about the emergency exit strategy, the planning for the what if, the planning for the things you don't want to plan for. So we want to talk about protecting your family. And this is a picture of my family. This is where I get a little bit personal and I'll break up a little bit. But when we talk about protecting your family, we talk about several things. One, first is having a will. This is something you would get from your estate attorney. You're probably well versed about it. If you don't have one, no matter where you are in practice, going and getting your will set up is vitally important. Please go take care of that immediately. Attached to a will, though, for the sake of you as a practice owner, is something called a codicil. The codicil is what would dictate how your practice can be operated in the event that you can't do that. So it essentially turns over the power of operations to someone else. This could be really anyone. We often will suggest that it not be a close family member or a close friend, because if something happens to you, they are probably very busy taking care of you or taking care of the affairs or the estate. But again, a codicil can name just about anybody. I know that I'm named in a significant number throughout the country that I probably don't even know about. But it's someone that can just come in, keep the doors open and operating. So those pie charts that I showed you just a second ago, we can help avoid that as much as possible. And at the very least, keep the practice open, operational, seeing patients, keep hygiene running so that someone can come in and take over a viable practice. The other thing that we suggest is a letter of instructions. The letter of instructions is a whole host of information for anybody that's going to operate your practice, or it could be your spouse, to come in and understand exactly where everything is for your practice. It's your insurance agents, it's your dental reps, it's your equipment reps, it's your bankers, it's everything that helps you continue to operate that practice that you may not have just openly shared somewhere and maybe somebody doesn't know about it. But the letter of instructions is something where you can document all that and have it sitting just in case something happens. This is an example left of the codicil. So it's a very short document, but it's extremely important just in case something happens. On the right is a copy of a letter of instructions with just the cover page and the first page. It's several pages where we prompt you to say, these are the things that you need to have ready just in case something happens. You can actually get this, the letter of instructions, by going to this QR code, or you can go to this URL, www.henryscheindpt.com/whatif. Again, henryscheindpt.com/whatif. We will give you that letter of instructions. It is vitally important. That's how important we feel that it is, that you need to have it. We will give it to you. Just go download it. The codicil would come from your estate attorney, where you can reach out to one of us and we can help you get in touch with someone to get that for you if you so need it. But having the will and the codicil and then the letter of instructions are important. So again, we talked about the will, the codicil, the letter of instructions. The one piece missing, though, is the practice valuation. So we're going to tie it right back to that. Having that valuation on hand and up to date, in the case that something happens, can move things all along very quickly in the event that we need to transact your practice. And again, if you don't do it within the 30 to 60 to potentially 90 days, the value could just evaporate and leave your estate or your family with nothing. So if you talk about developing your emergency and exit strategy plan, please, again, draft your letter of instructions and gather that important life information. henryscheindpt.com/whatif. We are happy to give that to you because we feel it's that important. Right after you work on that, as soon as possible, obtain a professional valuation on each practice. Get someone who knows what they're doing. I'd like to suggest that's something that we are happy to help you with. But obtain a professional valuation and keep it up to date. So then in case something happens tomorrow, which is unforeseen, you're ready and prepared. If you have partners or co-owners in your practice, make sure you get your buy and sell agreements reviewed. A lot of times you'll cross-insure each other just in case something happens, but you want to check just to make sure what would happen if one of you were not able to come to work tomorrow. I suggest having an experienced transition consultant look that over, not for the legal component, but for the transitional components of it. And then you very likely will want to have legal counsel review it as well. And again, make sure that that's up to date. Have your leases reviewed just in case, and discuss any feedback you get with both your CPA and attorney, because this is big estate, proper planning. Your practice is likely the most valuable asset that you have and will continue to be. It's the one asset that will throw money at you every single day for you to live off of. But again, what we talked about between Jeff and Phil, how we're growing that, growing not only your collection, but your net income, your livelihood is all baked into your practice. So make sure that all of that is set and properly ready to go, just in case something happens for you. We really appreciate you joining us. You can please, if you have any questions, again, put them in the Q&A or reach out to us at webinars@henryschein.com. You can also see a whole catalog of past webinars at henryscheindental.com/webinars. They're clinical, practice management. We have other ones in practice transition. So please take some time. We appreciate spending the time with you today. Look forward to your questions. Look forward to working with you in the future.